The house smelled like rot and dust, like it had been abandoned for a long time. The kind of smell that sticks in your throat and clings to your clothes. It wasn't fresh. Whatever happened here had happened a while ago, but decay lingers. It seeps into the walls, the floorboards, and the bones of a place. The front door was busted in, raiders, probably, or maybe just desperate people looking for a place to hide. Either way, they were gone now. All that remained was the wreckage they had left behind. I hesitated on the threshold, listening. The wind slipped through the broken windows, carrying distant sounds from outside. Rustling leaves, a creaking sign, and the occasional moan of something not quite dead. But inside, silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I stepped forward, rifle at the ready, scanning the room. The furniture had been overturned, drawers pulled from dressers, their contents spilling out across the floor. Someone had picked this place clean. The shelves were stripped bare, the kitchen cabinets left hanging open like gaping mouths. The fridge door swung open slightly in the breeze, its inside covered in dried splatters of something I didn't want to identify. Whoever lived here had either left in a hurry or died trying. I moved carefully through the wreckage, my boots crunching over shattered glass and old papers. There were signs of a struggle, bullet holes in the walls, dried blood smeared across the floor. Not enough to be a massacre, but enough to say this place hadn't been abandoned peacefully. I could almost picture it. A family, maybe, holed up in here, trying to wait things out. Maybe they had enough supplies to last a while. Maybe they thought they were safe. But safety didn't last long in this world. My eyes caught movement, a flicker of paper beneath a fallen chair. I nudged it aside with my boot, revealing a notebook half buried in dust. The cover was worn, the edges were curled and frayed. I crouched down, picking it up carefully. The pages were stiff, smudged with dirt, and something darker. Blood, maybe? But it wasn't soaked, which meant whoever wrote in it hadn't died while holding it. They had time to put it down before whatever happened to them. I thumbed through the pages, scanning messy handwriting and faded ink. There were notes, dates, observations. It was a record of something, of someone. Someone had left their story behind, and in a world where so many lives ended without a trace, the least I could do was make sure that it wasn't forgotten. Entry 1. The world didn't end in fire or ice, it ended in blood. The infection spread first, silent, creeping. At first it seemed like any other outbreak. Fevers, delirium, violent outbursts. Some people fought it off, but most didn't. And those who died didn't stay dead. The bodies got back up, and suddenly hospitals became useless. Cities turned into war zones, and nobody was safe. The news called it an aggressive viral pathogen. Governments scrambled to contain it, but the infection spread faster than they could react. They told us to stay inside and to wait for help, but help never came. Law enforcement crumbled under the weight of it all. The hospitals overflowed and fell silent. The streets became hunting grounds. The infected weren't just sick, they were something else entirely. Relentless, tireless. The rules of life and death had changed overnight, and we weren't ready. And then came the blood plague. At first people thought it was just another strain, another mutation of the infection. But it wasn't. It didn't just kill. It twisted those already turned into something worse. Much worse. The ones infected with it were different. They weren't just walking corpses. They were stronger, faster, and far more aggressive. They didn't shuffle mindlessly like the others. They hunted. Their eyes burned red. Their bodies pulsed with some unnatural energy, and they spread the plague faster than anything before it. A normal bite from an infected could take days to kill, if you couldn't fight off the infection, but a bite from one of them? Hours, sometimes less. But from the moment you were bitten, your fate was sealed. I remember when the cities burned, whether they were acts of desperation, misguided attempts to purge the infection, or just chaos taking its natural course. We'll never know. The sky choked with black smoke for days. It didn't stop the infected. Nothing did. We tried to run. We tried to fight. But no matter what, the dead kept coming. The roads were packed with cars, entire families trying to escape. Some never made it out of their driveways. Others got further, but the highways were no better. Crashed vehicles, hastily abandoned supplies, bodies scattered along the asphalt like discarded trash. Some of them still moved, twitching and reaching. The ones of us who got out, we had no idea what came next. We ran without a destination, into the woods, into the hills, anywhere but the places we had once called home. Some found refuge in small towns that had already gone dark. Others banded together, forming groups in abandoned buildings, moving at night, like ghosts in a world that no longer belonged to us. But running didn't mean escaping. Not really. The longer we survived, the more we learned that there were worse things than the dead. The blood plague wasn't the only mutation. Other horrors had taken shape, grotesque versions of the infected that seemed to defy reason. Some whispered that these monstrosities weren't just the result of the virus mutating naturally. Maybe this was never a natural outbreak at all. Maybe it was a man-made disaster, an experiment gone wrong, a disease created to sell the cure. Only it escaped before they were ready. Instead of controlling it, it controlled them. Screamers were the first that we encountered. At a first glance, they looked like any other infected. Pale, gaunt, their skin stretched too tight over their bones. But they didn't bite, and they didn't claw, because they couldn't. It almost looked as though someone had tried to disarm them, literally. But in doing so, they had made them far more deadly. They screamed. And that scream was worse than any weapon. One shriek and every undead in the area would come running, drawn like moths to a flame. More than one survivor had been torn apart just because they weren't fast enough to silence a screamer in time. Then there were bloaters. These were different, swollen, grotesque, barely even human anymore. Their bodies pulsed, distended bellies sloshing with the toxic rot inside them. If you got too close, they'd burst, releasing a cloud of choking, putrid gas that burned your lungs and made your vision swim. A single breath could mean infection, and, if you were unlucky, death. But the worst were the ferals and the juggernauts. Ferals were fast, unnaturally fast. They moved on all fours like animals, their yellowed eyes locking onto their prey before pouncing. They could tear a person apart in seconds, ripping into flesh with their sharpened fingers and jagged teeth. You could hear them before you saw them, a low, guttural growl, the sound of feet pounding against the pavement. If you heard that, you only had seconds to react, and if you weren't ready, you wouldn't make it. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they were also pack animals. And then there were juggernauts. The first time I saw one, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was bigger than any human should be, standing taller than a doorway, its body bloated with muscle and decay. It moved slow, but it didn't need to be fast. If it grabbed you, it was over. We lost good people to them, people who thought a few bullets would be enough. They weren't. It took everything we had to bring one down, and even then, it felt like we only barely survived. Survival meant more than just running. It was about learning. Learning that noise meant death, that fire drew them in, but so did the smell of blood. That people, when pushed to the brink, could be just as dangerous, if not more so, as the infected. The old rules didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was surviving long enough to see the next sunrise. We told ourselves that it would get better, that someone, somewhere, would find a cure, or a safe zone, or some place untouched by all of this. But as time passed, those hopes faded. No one was coming. There was no cure. This was the world now, and we had to decide how to live in it. Entry 2. I wasn't alone, not at first. We had a place, walls, food, plans. We thought we were safe, thought we were smart. But safety is only an illusion in a world like this. There were 6 of us. Darren, and Becca, the couple who had been together since college. They clung to each other like lifelines, never more than a few feet apart. Lewis, the old man who used to run the gas station before everything fell apart, always muttering about how things used to be simpler. Nadia, quiet and sharp-eyed, who never talked about her past but always seemed to know what to do. And then there was me, and Henry, the one I trusted most. We had met in the early days, thrown together by circumstance, bound by survival. We had rules, we had routines, we stayed quiet, kept our fires low, and rationed our supplies. We took turns on watch, always keeping an ear out for sounds of the dead, or worse, the living. We only went out when we had to, scavenging in teams of 2, always returning before sundown. It worked, for a while. We had a rhythm, a fragile sense of control, but it only takes one mistake. It started with a supply run. Becca and Lewis went together, heading for a nearby pharmacy we hadn't checked yet. They were supposed to be back within 2 hours. 3 hours passed, then 4. By the time we decided to go after them, the sun was dipping below the trees, shadows stretching long and dark. We found Lewis first, or what was left of him. His torso was slumped against the wreckage of a car, his stomach torn open, his legs completely missing, face frozen in a twisted expression of pain. No sign of Becca, just blood, a lot of blood, too much to hope that she'd made it out. Henry pulled me back before I could get any closer. We need to go. I wanted to argue, to search, to make sure that she wasn't there, hurt and alone. But then we heard it. The unmistakable low, blood-chilling, body-shattering roar of a juggernaut. The ground shook as it stamped around. It was coming closer. We ran. Back to the house, back to the others, but when we got there something was wrong. The gate was open. The front door was hanging off of its hinges. The smell of blood was thick in the air. The infected had already been here. The next few minutes were a blur, screaming, gunshots, and the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart. I remember Nadia dragging me towards the back door, her grip like iron on my wrist. I remember Henry yelling something, maybe my name. I remember running, just running. I didn't stop until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out beneath me. I didn't know how long I'd been running for, or how far I'd gone, but when I finally slowed, the silence was deafening. I hid that night, curled up beneath the wreckage of an old truck, too exhausted to move, too afraid to sleep. My hands were still shaking, my body aching from the frantic sprint away from what used to be home. I replayed it over and over in my mind. Lewis's body, the empty house, the screams. Had anyone else made it out? Was Henry still alive? Nadia? Darren? Becca? Or was I really alone? The morning came too soon. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle protesting. I couldn't stay in one place for too long. I had to move. But where? We had spent so long fortifying that house, making it safe, and now it was gone. There was no going back. I had no supplies, no weapons, nothing but the clothes on my back and the lingering weight of everything I had lost. I walked for hours, avoiding roads, keeping to the trees. Every sound made my skin prickle. Every distant moan or rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I had never felt this exposed before, never been this vulnerable. We had always moved in pairs, and now there was no one watching my back. There was a moment where I thought I was done for. As I skirted around a particularly big tree, I saw something move to the left of me. I turned and gasped. A disgusting green-tinged thing was running, if you could even call it that, more like quickly staggering towards me. I ran, knowing that it was always better to run first and ask questions later in this world. It was fast in a clumsy way, but luckily for me it tripped. Its huge belly crashed into the floor and it exploded into a huge pile of gas. I instinctively held my breath. I didn't know what that gas was, but I highly doubted it would be any good for me. I also knew better than to stick around. Well, not particularly loud. That explosion was loud enough, and I didn't know what might have heard it. By midday, hunger gnawed at my stomach. I needed food, water, and shelter. The world didn't care about my grief or my fear. Survival was all that mattered. Then I saw it. A gas station just off the highway, its sign hanging crooked. shattered glass littering the pavement. It looked ransacked, but I had to try. There might still be something left. I crept inside, stepping over broken shelves and discarded wrappers. The place had been picked clean. Empty cans, torn open bags, and dust covered the counters and floor. But in the back, behind the register, I found a half-full bottle of water. It was warm, and the plastic slightly warped, but I didn't care. I drank greedily, nearly choking on the first sip. A noise outside made me freeze. A slow, dragging scuffle. I crouched low, peering through the broken window. A figure staggered down the road, its movements jerky, unnatural. Blood caked its clothes, its skin grey and rotting. Just one, but one was enough. I gripped the bottle tighter, willing myself to stay still. It passed, never turning its head, never noticing me. I let out a slow breath, my body tense. This was life now. Constant fear, constant running. I had survived the night, but there would be more nights. More dangers, more losses, and no guarantees. I wasn't alone, not at first, but I was now. Entry 3. I spent the night on the gas station roof. There was a tent behind the building, half collapsed and covered in dirt, but the fabric was still good. I dragged it up with me, using an old metal ladder bolted to the side. The infected don't climb. That was the one advantage I still had. I barely slept. The night was full of noises, shuffling feet, distant groans, the occasional sharp screech from something in the dark. I had no weapon, nothing but my bare hands if something found me up there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house, the door hanging off its hinges, and I heard the screams. My mind cruelly filling in the blanks with images I didn't want to see. Morning finally arrived, and I started preparing to leave, unsure of where I was going to go, or what my plan really was. I just knew that I couldn't stay here long. Supplies were low, and staying in one place for too long was asking for trouble. And then I saw him, Henry. He was moving along the road, staying low and sticking to the trees. I almost didn't believe it. I thought he was gone, but there he was, alive, real. And then I saw something else. A feral, roaming the tree line further up the road, right where Henry was headed. My heart clenched. I couldn't call out, it was too risky. My eyes darted around the rooftop until I spotted a small chunk of gravel near my foot. Carefully, I picked it up and weighed it in my hand, just enough to get his attention. I took a slow breath and then tossed it in his direction. It landed with a faint tap near his feet. Henry flinched, his head snapping up. I met his eyes and pointed sharply toward the feral. His expression shifted, understanding immediately. I gestured toward the back of the gas station, then up, motioning for him to climb. He hesitated only for a second, before slipping into the shadows along the side of the building. I crouched low, straining to hear his footsteps over the distant groan of the undead. A moment later, the metal ladder rattled softly. I moved to the edge, gripping the top rung as Henry pulled himself up, his movements sluggish, exhausted. The second he swung his leg over, I grabbed his arm and hauled him the rest of the way. He collapsed onto the rooftop, panting. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. And then, without thinking, I grabbed him for a tight hug. "You're alive!" I breathed. He let out a tired chuckle, his voice rough. "Yeah, barely." For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was too much to say, and none of it mattered right now. We had both made it out, and that was enough. We stayed at the gas station long enough for the feral to have wandered off, and it was only a matter of time before more infected wandered through. Henry told me about a group he'd run into, about a mile west. He said they had walls, supplies, and maybe even a doctor. We didn't have many options, so we went. The place was an old auto shop, reinforced with scavenged wood and barbed wire. There were 5 of them. Mason, the leader, a woman named Riley, an older man named Doc, a man named Ethan, and a kid, maybe 16, who went by Jay. They were wary, but they let us in when Henry vouched for me. A real roof, real beds, and food. It almost felt like a win. But then we found the blood plague. Jay was the first to show symptoms. He had been on the supply run that day and had got scratched. He said that it wasn't deep and that he'd be fine. By the time night fell, his skin was burning and his breath was ragged. His eyes had turned an awful shade of red. Doc tried, he really did. He gave Jay medicine, kept him hydrated, but we all knew it wouldn't be enough. We'd seen it before, and we'd seen what happens next. I can get the cure, Henry said that night. The military had some. They were using it at that refugee camp before it fell. Mason hesitated. That's a hell of a risk. Henry just looked at him. So is doing nothing. Jay let out a weak, feverish groan which distracted us from the brewing argument about what to do. We left. The camp wasn't far, but it was overrun. We could see the barricades, the watchtowers, but they were useless now, swarming with the dead. Bodies lay in heaps, some fresh, some long gone, and worse. We saw them. The red-eyed infected, plague victims. They moved differently, faster, almost like they knew where we were. The air was thicker here, and there was something in the air. It almost looked like red ash, but what was really concerning was that the air tasted like blood. We crept through the ruins, sticking close to the wreckage. The medical tent was still standing, barely. Inside, supplies were scattered, a few bodies slumped against the walls, and there, in a lock case, vials of the cure. Henry forced the lock, and I kept watch. Every second felt like an hour, and that's when I spotted it. An old hunting knife, half buried under debris. I grabbed it. Finally, something to defend myself with. And then I heard it. A scream. High-pitched, unnatural. Move! I grabbed Henry, dragging him back. The thing stood near the entrance, mouth stretched wide as it let out another wail. The sound sent a wave of infected into motion. They came from all directions, drawn to the noise. I slashed open the back wall of the medical tent with my newly found knife, and we ran. No hesitation. Henry had the vials, we just had to get out. Back at the auto shop, Jay was barely conscious. Then his body convulsed, breath rattling in his chest as the red veining along his arms deepened. His fingers curled like claws, and suddenly he wasn't Jay anymore. Riley screamed as he lunged. Mason fired first, and then Henry. It took all of us to bring him down. The room went silent, reality setting in. Riley's breath was shaky, her hands gripping her arm, knuckles white. A long, bloody scratch ran down her skin, stark against the dirt and sweat. No, it wasn't, he didn't. Her voice cracked, desperate, as if denying it could make it untrue. Riley backed away, her breathing quick and uneven. Mason looked at her, and then at us, like he was already making the decision none of us wanted to say out loud. Henry didn't wait for anyone to speak. He reached into his pack and pulled out the vial, holding it up for us all to see. She's going to be okay, he said, his voice steady. We have the cure. The tension broke, but not completely. It was never that easy. Mason hesitated for a second longer before nodding, stepping aside to let Doc take over. By sunrise, we buried Jay. That was the cost of survival. In one way or another, you always lost someone. Entry 4. Some people are worse than the dead. They see the end of the world as a free pass to take whatever they want. It had been a few weeks since Jay, and life hadn't gotten any easier. But it had settled into something that resembled a routine. Mason's group was good at surviving. We took shifts on watch, keeping the auto shop fortified, and scouted for supplies when we could. The infected were always a problem, but we could handle them. It was the living we had to worry about. The first sign of trouble was the sound of engines. 3 trucks rolled up, kicking up dust, their beds loaded with men armed to the teeth. They didn't wear uniforms, but they might as well have. The way they moved, the way they spread out, it was clear they had done this before. Mason stepped forward to meet them. "We don't want trouble," he said. The man in front, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek, smiled like Mason had told a joke. "Neither do we. Just looking to do some trading." His voice was smooth, too smooth. "We don't have much," Mason said carefully. The man's eyes flickered over the barricades and the supplies stacked near the doors. "Looks like more than not much to me." The air felt thick, tension crackling between us. I shifted my grip on my knife, keeping my movements slow, deliberate. Henry stood at my side, fingers twitching near his gun. Riley and Doc stayed near the back, watching. Then the man's smile faded. "Here's how this works," he said. "You share what you have, and we don't have a problem. Or..." He just let the words hang there, gesturing to his men, to the rifles slung over their shoulders. A choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Mason exhaled through his nose, a slow, measured breath. "We'll give you some supplies." The man smirked like he'd won, like we were nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his day. His men started forward, ready to take what they pleased. That's when the first shot rang out. One of Mason's scouts, Ethan, fired from the rooftop, hitting one of the raiders square in the chest. The man dropped, and all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted, bullets ripping through metal and wood. I dove behind an old truck, heart hammering in my chest. Henry was already moving, taking shots where he could. Mason barked orders, trying to keep us from getting pinned down. The raiders weren't expecting a fight, but they weren't amateurs either. They regrouped fast, using the trucks as cover. I peeked out and saw the man with the scar barking orders, his face twisted in fury. This wasn't a raid anymore, it was a war. "Move!" Mason shouted, gesturing towards the garage. We scrambled for better cover. Riley yelped as a bullet grazed her arm, but she kept moving. Doc, who had been standing next to her, hadn't been so lucky. He crumpled onto the floor, blood spreading rapidly from a bullet hole in his chest. We didn't have time to stop. We didn't have time to mourn, not right now. I crawled towards him, but Henry yanked me back, just as a bullet had struck where I had been seconds ago. "Can't help him," he hissed. Doc gasped, his hands clutching his wound. I wanted to tell him we'd save him, that it wasn't as bad as it looked, but I couldn't lie. We locked eyes for a brief moment, before he went still. The fight didn't last long, but it was long enough. 3 of them lay dead when the dust settled. The rest pulled back, engines roaring as they retreated. But they'd be back. We all knew it. Mason paced, fists clenched. "They won't let this go." "We can't stay here," Henry said. Everything would have, as if right on cue, he got cut off as a low moan echoed through the barricades, then another. The gunfire had drawn them, the infected. They were closing in fast, shambling towards the shop, hungry for the noise and the scent of fresh blood. The first of them appeared at the edge of the lot, dragging its ruined body across the pavement. More followed, dozens pouring in from the street, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Their eyes glowed red in the dim light, their twisted forms writhing with the sickness that had claimed them. Mason cursed under his breath. "We're out of time." "We have to go," I said, tightening my grip on my knife. The words settled heavy in the air. The auto shop had been home, but now it was a target. We had no choice. We each grabbed an emergency bag that we'd all decided to keep stashed in the back in case something happened that made our home unsafe. The plan had always been to run if we had to. None of us had expected to actually need it so soon. As we made our way out the back, we kept low, moving quickly. The infected were still focused on the front, clawing at the barricades, pounding at the doors. We slipped away into the night, our footsteps barely making a sound. A few blocks away we stopped to catch our breath. The area was quiet now, the gunfight long over, but the damage had been done. The auto shop would be overrun by now, if it wasn't already. Riley clutched her arm where she'd been grazed. "Where do we go now?" Mason exhaled, looking over his shoulder at the shop one last time before turning away. "We'll find somewhere new." No one said anything as we kept walking. We'd lost too much in one night. There wasn't room for grief. Not yet. The dead were predictable. The living, they were worse. Entry 5. We didn't look back. The auto shop had been our home, but now it was just another graveyard waiting to happen. We moved fast, keeping low, listening for the telltale groans of the dead, or the growl of an engine that meant that the raiders had come back to finish what they'd started. The night swallowed us whole. The only sound was our footfalls on the cracked pavement. "We need shelter," Mason murmured. His voice was steady, but the tension in his shoulders told another story. "We need a plan," Henry countered. "We can't keep running blind." "There's a neighbourhood up ahead," Ethan said. He was still shaken from the fight, but his instincts were good. If we're lucky, one of the houses is still intact. We kept moving, exhaustion gnawing our bones. Riley's arm was bandaged. The bullet grazed, no longer bleeding, but she was pale, her movement sluggish. None of us had slept in over a day, and the weight of it dragged in our limbs. The neighbourhood was quiet, too quiet. "Looks clear," Henry said, scanning the street. The houses stood in eerie silence, windows shattered, doors kicked in. Some had been burned, blackened skeletons of homes that had once held families. Mason pointed at a 2-story house at the end of the block. "That one still has most of its windows, and it looks like someone reinforced the door, but that didn't mean that it was empty." Henry went first, knife in hand, easing the door open. The rest of us followed, weapons at the ready. The house smelled like dust and mildew. Furniture was overturned, drawers emptied in a rush. Whoever had lived here before had either fled or died trying. We cleared the first floor, checking closets and under furniture, anywhere something could be lurking. The kitchen had a few canned goods left behind, a small miracle, and downstairs the bedrooms were mostly intact. Someone had tried to fortify one of them, boards over the window, and a mattress shoved up against the door. Whoever was here didn't want company, Riley muttered. It doesn't matter now, Mason said. Get some rest. Rest. The word barely felt real, but sleep was a necessity, not a luxury. We took turns on watch, rotating through the night. I let the others sleep first, watching the street from a gap in the curtains. For a while it was just the wind, the occasional shuffle of something far off. My grip on my knife loosened. Maybe, just maybe, we'd caught a break. Days passed. We fortified the house, making it our own. Henry and Mason reinforced the fence with barbed wire scavenged from a nearby yard. Ethan set up a workshop in the front yard, rigging traps from scrap metal and broken tools. Riley started a garden in the backyard, planting whatever seeds we could find. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, we had something close to stability. But reality still loomed over us at all times. There was no cavalry coming, no cure, no rebuilding. This is just how things are now, and that's probably not going to change. The world that once was, the cities, the governments, the safety nets, it's all gone, crumbling into dust along with the bones of those who didn't make it. We survive because there's no other choice. We scrape by day after day because stopping means dying. Maybe that's all we've ever done. Maybe that's all we'll ever do. But if there's any hope left, it's a whisper lost to the wind. But in this house, behind these walls, we have carved out something resembling a life. However fragile, however fleeting, it's ours. And for now, that has to be enough.